Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Yes, I did voluntarily retire from Congress and elected not to run again in the most recent election in 2014. And at the end of this address, you will understand why. And yes, I am a CPA and was a member in Congress a proud member of the CPA caucus in the House and the Senate. There were 8 of us. Yeah. Yes, you can applaud that. Also in the House and the Senate, there were around 250 attorneys. I always considered it a fair fight. Okay, so when I was asked to give this address, I said, well, we want to hear what you think maybe is going to happen in Congress, Senate and House and the White House during the balance of this Congress this year and next year. And the answer to that basically is nothing. Thank you, it's been good to speak. Okay, that may seem like a joke, but it's not very far off from the truth. Washington is a pretty dysfunctional place today. There is very little going on. There is, to quote Carly Fiorina in the debate a couple days ago, she was talking about flying around the world on airplanes and said that that was an activity and not an accomplishment. And there is a lot of activity in Washington these days. It's an extremely active and busy place, but there's very little accomplishment. The reason for that, first we have to step back and understand what the greatest motivating factor in elected politics is. And the greatest motivating factor in elected politics is nobody wants to lose. Nobody wants to go home from this job on your shield. So particularly in the House, where you're up every 2 years, less so in the Senate, where you're only what's called in cycle every 6 years. But still, everyone after the next election starts to think about the subsequent election, after the past election. And with each vote, what will this do for my reelection? Will this earn me a primary opponent? Will this help fund a primary opponent? Will this help fund some general election opponent? Will this do both? Will this hurt me in my fundraising in order to help me get reelected, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And today, with the world as it is, most people elected in Washington believe that the safest path for them to their reelection is to stay true to their faction, their political faction, whatever that is. If that's progressive on the left, or Tea Party on the right, or liberal, or conservative, or moderate. And to show you how few moderates there are, when I was first elected to Congress in 2005, there was always a Blue Dog Caucus, which was moderate Democrats, and what was called a Tuesday group, just because they met on Tuesdays, of the moderate Republicans. Those two groups, the Tuesday group and the Blue Dogs, comprised about 100 members of Congress when I was elected in 2005. Today, there's only about 20 of them when you put both of them together. So that has basically sent a message to members of Congress, standing in the middle of the road is not a very good place to be. It is where you get run over. So the best place for me to be politically is to stay pure and true and absolute to my faction. Story I have on that, there is a liberal Democrat. I'm a conservative Republican, for those of you who didn't know that. I had a liberal Democratic friend from Oregon by the name of Earl Blumenauer. He's still in Congress, nice guy. We always got along, and we always tried to do things together whenever we could, because we just kind of liked each other. I remember approaching him on something, and he says, John, I just can't go there. And he says, I'm worried about a primary opponent. And I said, oh, one from the right, I presume. And he says, no, a primary opponent from the left. And I said, Earl, the left of you? There's no space on the left of you. How can that be? And he says, John, you don't understand. I actually believe in the ownership of private property. There's plenty of people who don't. And they'll come after me, and I would like to avoid that. And so that is, and I'm not singling out Earl because that was a bad thing. That's the position that so many people are taking. I remember one of my fellow congressmen, chairman of the committee from Texas, from the Dallas area. He had no opponent in the last election, none. No Republican, no Democrat, no opponent. He was a Republican. And I approached him on some bill, and he said, well, what will my local Tea Party people think of this? And I said, well, they probably won't like it, but so what? You had no opponent. You're not going to lose. And he said, I want to keep that right flank tied down. I don't want any space over there. And if you can't get them to approve it, then I can't go for it. And so this is the sort of thing that's going on back there. So with everybody staying true to their faction, then if it is safer politically for me to vote entirely as a progressive and to be absolutely true and pure to my progressive constituents' desires, and it is dangerous for me to come out of that place and go make a deal with a Tea Party person or with a conservative or with a moderate, then I stay back in that progressive hole and I don't come out of that. And that's what you see happening now. It is very difficult to pull people out. Now, people say to me, well, is there no hope? You know, is this the end of democratic process in America? No. The system is not broken. You could argue that part of the reason that this is occurring is because the system does work. If you think people in Washington are insensitive to what you think, or don't care about what their constituents believe, they're not. They are very sensitive to it because they don't want to lose. So you could argue that this is showing that democracy is working, but that the representative government, I should say, is working, that our constitutional system is working. But the problem is that right now it creates dysfunction in Washington. We are not a parliamentary system. And it's one of the things that I've often said. I'm as conservative as anybody else. If I could build the world the way I would like it to be, if I were king, not queen, not girl, it would be as conservative a world as anybody out there, Tea Party person, whatever, would build. But you know what? I'm not king. It's called democracy, and it's not a parliamentary system. In a parliamentary system, one party controls everything at any given moment. But that's not the case here. Our founders set up a different system, which I believe is superior. But it means that very rarely does one party control all the levers. And so, therefore, in order to make something happen, you have to make a deal. You got to work with the other side. And if that politically puts you in danger and you don't work with the other side, then it's very hard to get anything done in this system. So what might change this? I think there are three things that could possibly, I think one of these three things will change this in the fairly near future. The first one is one I don't want to have happen, and that is an existential event. You have another 2001, you have another 2008, a great crisis that is external. People come together. They have to come together. It's the time when you break through things, and when the Tea Party and the Progressive work together, because neither one of them wants to see the country fall apart. And so, or be attacked, or whatever, or everybody lose their job, or whatever it might be. And so one thing that could make it occur is an existential event. The second thing that could make it occur is leadership. There is no leadership in Washington right now in either party. There are managers. And my friend John Boehner is a fine manager. But to be frank, he's not a great leader. A manager looks at all of you, figures out where you are, and tries to manage this whole thing. A leader says, here's where we're going. Here's why we need to go there. Follow me. And if it's a true leader, you sit there and you may say, I don't know if that's the right hill. I don't know if this is the right time. I don't know, but if that person says we're going, you know what? I'm in. Let's go. You've all seen the difference in your businesses, in your companies, in your life between leaders and managers. And we have a number of fine managers in both parties in Washington right now, but we are devoid of true leaders. And a leader can maybe break through those factions that people are stuck in and get them to work together. Obviously, we can't have a new leader until there is an intervening election. So we will have a new president. The new president might be a leader, might not. We'll see. Might be able to lead, might not be able to lead. Depends on that person, whether he or she wins by a large margin. There are a whole bunch of factors that we don't know yet, but we'll find out in 15 months or whatever it is. As far as the leaders of the Democratic caucuses in both the House and the Senate, you could have changes in some of those next year. You could even have changes from all my sources in Washington. Mr. Boehner is in some trouble right now. And perhaps there could be a change there sooner than the next election, but I wouldn't expect changes in the others until after the next election. The Democrats in the Senate will have a new leader for sure, because Harry Reid will be stepping down. So we could have leadership. And the third thing that could change it is you. And that's that the people vote different. That the people decide, I'm going to reward someone who believes in what I believe in, but who is willing to go out and make an accommodation, to take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, to get a half measure towards what they want instead of a full measure towards what they want. I'm going to reward that person with my vote and my support, rather than rewarding the person with your vote and your support who is 100% pure to everything you believe, and who stands for only 100% of what you want and not what you don't want. So if people vote differently, that too, Congress is a very reflective place to what the people are thinking and what the people are working, and that could change it. Okay, so understanding that that's the landscape, and that's where we are. What now? What does the rest of the year look like? Well, the first thing are deadlines. Things coming on deadlines in September and October. 3 big deadlines. One is the funding of the government. Technically, the 12 appropriations bills. The fiscal year for the federal government ends September 30th, not including today. They are in session today. But after today, there are only 5 days in session before September 30th, before the end of the fiscal year. They have only 5 days in sessions because of the Pope's visit and Jewish holidays, that there's only 5 days left before the end of the fiscal year. So that's why the chance you're hearing of a government shutdown, of not coming to some agreement by the end of the month, it's not an insignificant chance. It definitely could occur. On the appropriations bills, what are the battles? What's the problem? Okay, well, the factions in the Republican Party are at each other's throats. It is vicious inside those Republican caucus meetings. And there are 2 big things that various Republican factions want. One of them is to not fund Planned Parenthood. This is an enormously visceral, important issue to a significant number of Republicans. And if any of you have seen those videos, you would know why. The second thing is national defense. The national defense conservatives have risen of late with all the challenges and all the instability in the world. And they want more money for defense spending. Okay, so you have those 2 factions fighting, and then there are others that want just little things or this and that. And what do the Democrats want on the Democratic side? What they usually want, which is more spending on domestic policy. They don't really care about the military. They're willing to go along with additional military funding, but only if they get additional domestic funding. And of course, Democrats would like to fund that with tax increases on people making over $200,000. That's a non-starter for Republicans. When the Planned Parenthood thing came up, the videos are so horrific that it was assumed that there would be a number of Democrats who would say, you know what, this is really bad stuff. And that either Planned Parenthood would recant and say, we won't do this stuff anymore, we're going to fire the people who did this, or blah, 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 or there would be a cut in funding. But no, it took a little while, but they got the Democrats all together, and they are holding unified behind Planned Parenthood. No reductions in funding, no changes in what they do, admitting no guilt or no wrongdoing. So that's going to be a huge loggerheads issue because both sides have dug in hard on that. The defense spending, the National Conservative, or the National Defense Republicans who want that additional defense spending, if they go along with what the Democrats want, which is more domestic spending, then you have to blow up the sequester, which they worked hard, we all worked hard to get, well, not the sequester, but we all worked hard to get a reduction in discretionary spending, and you basically have to backtrack on all that and vote to increase the deficit. Well, that is not a popular vote amongst most Republican factions. Remember, we're talking about not offending your base, so that's not a popular vote. I don't know how this thing gets resolved. I really don't. Now, you would think that what it might wind up being is that more money on defense, more money on discretionary, on domestic spending, and you continue to fund Planned Parenthood, you get all the Democrats, and you'll get some Republicans, but Boehner probably wouldn't survive. He would probably no longer be Speaker, and the divisions within the Republican Party would be immense. So it is a really tough situation, and I don't know how it's going to get resolved. One of the possibilities, of course, is that to delay it, is you can always pass what's called a CR, continuing resolution. And what that basically does is that just says we'll fund the government precisely the same levels as last year, and we'll do it for 30 days. Or we'll do it for 60 days, and give ourselves more time to work this thing through. Because there's only 5 days after today of session left, and I don't know how they bridge this gap in those 5 days, because there doesn't seem to be right now any breakthroughs out there. It's some kind of accommodation to slow it, to give them another 30 days could happen. But on the other side, there's politics, and we're getting close to an election year. Democrats basically believe, they believe based on what happened 2 years ago, that a shutdown will be a good thing for them politically. So as much as they don't want to see it from a public standpoint, if it happens, all indications are that Republicans will be blamed and that they will gain politically. So they're not going to give much, because they basically think they have a strong hand. So they're not going to give much, and if it shuts down, and they think if it shuts down over Planned Parenthood or defense spending, that's a good thing for them. The other thing is the debt limit. Debt limit, technically, we're probably not going to reach. You never know exactly when you run out of cash, but they're projecting right now that it's around November 1st, something like that, after using the extraordinary measures that Treasury always uses. Debt limit is always a tough thing to pass. It is always voted on by the majority party, whichever one that is. When I was in the minority, and as a Republican, Democrats were in charge, never voted to increase the debt limit. You make the majority party do it. You're a majority party, that's your responsibility. When I was in the majority, always voted to raise the debt limit, because you're in the majority party, that's your responsibility. So it is not exactly, it is a very political vote, and not exactly as much of an ideological vote as you think, because the Democrats are like, not our problem, you guys pass it. Well, it's really tough. It's much tougher to get Republicans to vote for it, because deficits matter more to the Republican base than they do to the Democratic base. So it's hard to get Republicans to vote for it. Another problem. If they do come up with something on the appropriations bills, they would be smart to stick the debt limit in there and get it done too. And then whatever Republicans vote for it, just take one nasty, ugly, rotten vote rather than two. And so that's a difficult thing. And then the third thing that's on deadline is the highway fund. Your gas tax that goes into the federal highway fund that pays for highway. Again, what are the differences? Here is where Republicans are saying, we don't need any more highway funds. 25% goes to non-highways, goes to rapid transit and buses and bike lanes and things like that. Cut all that out, get rid of prevailing wage, reduce the cost of it, and you'll be able to build 35% more highways with the same money. Problem solved, no issue. Democrats say, no way we're cutting rapid transit and bike lanes. Rapid transit helps reduce congestion. We're not doing that. That's a stupid idea. And then they say, and we're not reducing prevailing wage. Unions, prevailing wage, minimum wage. This is a huge core issue for the Democratic Party. We're never doing that. So you forget those things. We want an increase in the tax, because that's what we need to do. But because the gas tax is kind of regressive, let's instead increase income taxes on people making over $200,000, and we'll just divert that to the highway fund. So, again, there's no meeting of the minds there. In July, they worked on this for months, couldn't come up with anything, delayed it till now. Now, again, if you look at this in the olden days, there would have been accommodations. You would have figured out how to give each side a little bit and make the thing work. You know, find out, okay, what is your bedrock principle you can't give up? Democrats, Republicans, okay, do that. Then these others, let's figure out a way to give you a little, give me a little, and make this thing go together. And frankly, that's the way it's going to have to work if this stuff is ever going to go forward in the future. But there's another issue, what's going to happen with the highway fund. So you got all these things on deadline. When you have major issues like this on deadline, it sucks all the oxygen out of Washington, D.C. You can't get the naming of a post office through when this kind of stuff sucks all the oxygen, because everybody's all over these big issues. You're pounded with constituent emails and constituent things on this. You get protests at your district office, that you're talking to your district office and what they're going to do and all that sort of thing. It just sucks all the oxygen out of the town. And it is really difficult to get anything else done. So even in the best of circumstances, which I just said we don't have, but even in the best of circumstances, it's difficult to get other things done when all this stuff is going on. So, with that lovely, you know, if you wanted a motivational speaker, you know, a coach, football coach, something like that might have been good. Steve Sarkisian could come, you could all have a drink. It would be, but I'm an SC guy. No, UCLA people don't get too excited. Anyway, but with that perspective, let me talk about some of the specific issues that you all in this room were curious what's happening. As I said, probably nothing on any of these issues, but I want to at least give you the landscape for each of these issues, and then I'll be happy to take your questions. Tax reform. Paul Ryan is chairman of Ways and Means. He just became chairman of Ways and Means. He has 6 years under Republican term limits to be chairman of Ways and Means, assuming that Republicans keep the majority in the House over that 6-year period, which most prognosticators believe that because of the redistricting that happened last time in the landscape of the country, that is likely to be the case. So he believes he has 6 years. Tax reform and entitlement reform, which are both in Ways and Means Committee, are the two things that Paul Ryan wants to do more than anything else that he believes will save the country. And by the way, when I talk about leaders, Paul Ryan is probably the only person I can think of in the House Republicans that is a true leader, that when he stands up, he can basically move the entire caucus. And another thing about a leader is they're respected by the other side of the aisle. If you can lead your people, but the other side of the aisle hates your guts, you cannot lead, because again, it's democracy. Some of those people have got to come along if you want to make the thing work. And so you have to be a true leader. You have to command the respect and be able to lead to a place, all the people on your side of the aisle, but also have the respect of the people on the other side of the aisle, such that they will not immediately reject anything that comes out of your mouth. And Paul Ryan is one of those. So if anybody can get this stuff done, Paul Ryan's the guy. But tax reform is tough. It is a tough deal. Now, the easiest place to go is corporate, is C-Corp tax reform. That's the easiest place to go, because there's general agreement in Washington that the rates are too high and that there are too many credits, deductions, special things, blah, blah, blah. And that if we pull all those back, and that we can reduce the rates and make ourselves more competitive on a top-line rate around the world. Great, sounds fabulous. And the president says he's for that. But the details are very important. And certainly, Paul Ryan's done some outreaches to the White House. He's actually working with a lot of people in the White House staff, trying to see if there's some accommodation they can come to on corporate taxes. I don't put the chances of that at 0, but they're small, and the closer you get to the election, the less chance it becomes. By the way, here's why. Once either party has a nominee, and I don't mean a nominee at the convention, I mean it's clear who the nominee is going to be. That nominee then basically controls their caucuses in Washington. If Bernie Sanders and Ben Carson are the two presidential candidates. No laugh. Okay, I guess it's because we don't know who it's going to be. That shows you, okay? But you all think it could be anybody. But whoever is the nominee, whenever there's a Democratic nominee, that person will go speak to the Senate Democrats, and this will happen on the Republican side too, the Senate Democrats and the House Democrats, and say, don't you guys dare do this, don't you dare do this, and I want you to stand up and talk about this and talk about this, so that the messages you're giving are in harmony with the messages I'm giving, and so we have this fine thing through this. So basically the place gets run by the nominee as soon as it becomes apparent that there is a nominee in either party. So at that point, things pretty much shut down. But then prior to that, the closer you get to the election, the more the presidential politics takes over, and the actual elected politics in Washington starts to take a back seat during an election year. So I think there's a chance for this corporate tax reform, but it's very difficult, and also to do it is just very difficult. Many of you out there, those of you who are CPAs, have clients that are public company C Corps, and some of you are with public company C Corps, and you know that there are certain credits. You know, if the R&D credit is important to you, you are going to fight that like crazy. You're going to absolutely fight that like crazy. Not to let that thing go, even if it means a reduced rate, because it probably means a higher effective tax rate for your customer. So these are hard things to do. At some point, when you do it, you have to look certain constituent companies in the eye and say, I know this isn't going to help you. Sorry, we're doing it because we think it's going to help the country. And then that's what you have to do. But it's a difficult thing. Individual tax reform is really tough. At least on the corporate, there's an agreement between the parties of the general idea. We need to get the rates down to be more competitive around the world. On individual, not so much. Republicans want to get close to a flat rate, eliminate deductions and credits and so forth. When you do that, you basically get rid of a lot of those high tax rate brackets. That, of course, is the Democrats' whole mantra right now, is that even after the tax increases of the last few years, that taxes on people making $200,000 and above are not high enough, and that they need to go up. Well, you can't go to a flat tax and make those two, or something close to a flat tax and make those two things happen. So there's and then you still have the issues of eliminating deductions here. Charles Schumer, who will likely be the next Senate Democratic leader, has said that in any tax reform, eliminating the deduction for state and local income taxes is a non-starter with him. Why? He's from New York, a high tax state. Eliminating the state and local deduction, by the way, is not a partisan thing. It is a regional thing. The Texans are all for it. So are the people from Washington. So are the people from any number of low tax states. But the Californians and the New Yorkers and people from Illinois are not. And so that you would think would be the easiest, because everybody pays state and local taxes, right? So if you want to get rid of a deduction or a credit and lower the rates for everybody, that's the low-hanging fruit. That's the easy thing. But the incoming Democratic caucus chairman in the Senate minority leader says it's a non-starter. So that stuff is difficult. Dodd-Frank, quick story on Obamacare. When Obamacare was passed, it was really kind of slapped together, and the authors of it and architects of it knew it had a lot of problems, and they wanted to fix them. But when Scott Brown was elected to the Senate in Massachusetts, they couldn't take the bill back through the Senate because they needed 60 votes, and they lost their 60th vote. So they had to pass it as is. Right after it passed, March of 2010, I think it was, Henry Waxman, then chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, scheduled some hearings to fix various of these obvious things in Obamacare, which even the authors of it knew didn't work because they'd been cobbled together to get the votes it needed to pass, and these things didn't work, and they were going to fix it. Nancy Pelosi yanked him into her office and said, Henry, you're not going to do this because this shows weakness. This indicates that we just passed this bill and it's not right. Our position is everything in this bill is right, everything in this bill is perfect, you cancel those hearings. And so he did. And that has been the position of the Democrats in Washington ever since. The position of the Republicans, conversely, has been there's nothing good in it. Repeal the whole damn thing. So, again, hard to have a combination when one side says get rid of the whole thing, the other side says we're not getting rid of a single piece. Dodd-Frank, from the beginning, Republicans never hated everything that was in it. They just hated certain things that were in it. Democrats were not committed to everything that was in it, but they were committed to the general idea of it. But within the last few years or so, the Democrats' position on Dodd-Frank has been the same as it is on Obamacare. We're not going to change anything. Conflict minerals, nothing. Even as much as some of these things appear to just be complete disasters. So attempts to chip this or change this or that have been pretty much thwarted by Maxine Waters, who's the ranking member of the Financial Services Committee in the House, and others who said, nope, we're not going to support any changes in this at all. So if you're looking for a lot of changes in Dodd-Frank, I don't think you're going to get them this year. There's also, within the committees of jurisdiction over that, there's not a lot of get along between. One of the things you do need to make this thing work is you need a Republican and a Democrat who are in charge of things to have some like and respect for one another so that they can sit down and make something happen. And when they don't like each other or don't respect one another, it's really, really hard, even if they're trying to make a deal, and that's oftentimes the case. Trade, the TPP and the EU and all that, you saw they finally got the Trade Promotion Authority, the TPA, through. Been a difficult thing again, and normally, almost always in Congress, there is a pro-trade majority. It's most but not all Republicans, and some but not most Democrats. And you put them together, and you have a majority for free trade. And you pretty much always have. But now what's happened is there are fewer Republicans for it because Obama's president. And because they don't like him, and they don't trust him. And the problem they had getting TPA, Trade Promotion Authority, through was that a lot of Republicans said, I'm not giving authority to this president to, write on the bathroom wall. I'm not giving him authority to do anything. So that has turned some otherwise free trade Republicans into, I'm not going to vote for anything this president does. So that makes even the trade things more difficult than they have been in the past. Tax inversions. We all know what's been happening. Again, agreement in Washington, bad thing. Jobs running overseas, bad thing. But the solutions on both sides of the aisle to fix them are completely different. And when this was all heating up during the Allergan situation here, which was really what was driving it in Washington, not just here, it was all heating up, a lot of talk about, we got to do something about this. But again, no agreement on what to do to fix it. Last thing before I take your questions, a lot of talk these days about China. And I just want to mention one thing about it from a little more of a global perspective in terms of how it's looked at in Washington. China has a bunch of problems. They have bank liquidity problems. They have huge debt problems. They now have all kinds of they have a lot of problems, all the financial problems. You probably all know what they are. I'm not going to tell you that. But what we have to worry about, one of the things Washington's really worried about, is China is a large country that is only held together by a very authoritarian state. And if people in that country become unhappy with what is happening with economic conditions and so forth there, the authoritarian state, in order to keep control, will have to crack down and or create a foreign diversion that unifies the country. So a lot of the concerns about China and Washington these days are not so much on the financial end, but if they cannot get a handle on their financial problems, how might that turn into a foreign policy issue going forward? So there's a lot of issues like that often that you see the surface and you don't always see the rocks and the shoals that lie below the tide. So now that I have completely got you uplifted and all that, I will finish with these two quotes and take your questions. Winston Churchill said that democracy was the worst form of government ever devised, except for all the others that have been tried from time to time. And the 19th century German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck said, people who like laws and sausages should never see either one being made. Those are two quotes on which I have lived in and I just gave you a look at the sausage factory, and it is not pretty. But the bottom line is, all those people in Washington, with very few exceptions, in spite of the disagreements and all that, they want what they believe is best for the country. They really do. They have different visions on what is best for the country, but they want what is best for the country. And in the end, through periods of turmoil like this, that will win out, and I think we're all going to be just fine. So I would ask for your questions now at this point. I think, are there microphones around, or how's that working? Yes, there are. Okay, there's a microphone. Questions? I just drained you all of any hope. Is that not we passed, oh, there's one right there. I say we can pass the second question. The first question, go to the second question. There's always a second question.
So I'm going to ask you to go reach back to your assembly experience. You described Washington very accurately, kind of the impasse between the right and the left. In California, we have one party holding almost every significant elected and appointed position. How does that dynamic change, and what's your view of the trajectory that we're on, particularly from a business competitiveness standpoint?
Yeah, I don't see it changing anytime soon. Nothing is forever in politics. It wasn't that long ago when you couldn't get elected in Texas as a Republican. Now you can't get elected in Texas as a Democrat. And it took 20 years to do that, but it only took 20 years to do that, to go from one to the other. So things can change. And I don't think that California is permanently a one-party state.